the pelvic girdle versus pelvic cavity. So let's begin with the first thing. First thing is first, the os coxa. The os coxa is a bone that is also known as coxa bone, which is formed by the fusion of three bones: the ischium, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Once again, is that the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis, and they merge and become the os coxa or the coxa bones at the acetabulum, which is a fossa. We will discuss on this in the next slide. Now, let's talk about the pelvic girdle versus the pelvic cavity. First, the pelvic girdle has two functions. And before we talk about the functions, let's talk about what is it made out of. The pelvic girdle is composed of two os coxa, So the pelvic girdle is composed of two os coxa. And the functions of pelvic girdle are, the pelvic girdle connects the lower extremity or the lower limbs to the exoskeleton. And the second function is the pelvic girdle transmits the weight of the upper body to the lower limbs. So they pass the weight on to the lower limbs through the pelvic girdle. The pelvic cavity is basically composed of four bones: the two os coxa, the sacrum, and the coccyx. So the question I would like for you to know is this: first question I would like for you to know is, on exam, if I were to ask you this question, is which bone or bones make up the pelvic girdle? And the simple answer could be two os coxa, or the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. As a recap, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis fuse to form the os coxa. So the difference between the pelvic girdle and the pelvic cavity is their functions. The pelvic girdle connects the lower extremity to the exoskeleton and also transmits the weight of the upper body to the lower limbs. The pelvic cavity houses the organs such as the reproductive organs. Now, what exactly is the pelvic brim? The pelvic brim basically the pelvic brim, I should say, is this bone marking that help to distinguish between the false pelvis and the true pelvis. So the pelvic brim forms an opening into the pelvic cavity. So in essence, everything above, the space above the pelvic brim, is considered to be the false pelvis. The space below the pelvic brim is known as the true pelvis. So the question could be, which bones make up the pelvic cavity? And the answer would be, there are four of them. Two os coxa of the appendicular skeleton, and the sacrum and the coccyx of the exoskeleton. So the next question would be, true or false? The pelvic girdle belongs to the appendicular skeleton. True. Next question is, the pelvic cavity is composed of bones of the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. True or false? Once again, true. And the reason why is this: the sacrum and the coccyx belong to the axial skeleton, and the two os coxa belong to the appendicular skeleton. Let's see what we can, these are the landmark that we can touch on the os coxa. The iliac crest is the ridge that can be felt along the ilium, and this is very important when you carry your baby on your hip, walking around the mall, doing shopping, and the baby would sit on the iliac crest. Okay. You can also do this as well as this. Put your hand on your hip. You can feel the ridge of the hip, and that would be called the iliac crest. Ischial tuberosity is a bony structure on the ischium that one sits on. So this is ischial tuberosity. Now compare between the ischium and the pubis. You can distinguish the thickness of the ischium when compared to the pubis. And the reason why is this: the ischium has more weight bearing capacity as opposed to the pubis. So if you think about what I've talked about, is that the size of a bone, or the thickness of the bone, reflects on the weight bearing capacity the bone has. So the thicker the bone is, the more weight bearing it has. So in this case, the ischium is a lot thicker than the pubis, and the reason why is it bears more weight support than the pubis. Now, I also mentioned the word acetabulum is a socket, and this socket itself is where the femur, the head of the femur, connects with. Now, if you look at the depth of the socket, it's very deep as opposed to the glenoid cavity of or glenoid fossa or glenoid cavity of the scapula. And for that reason, the hip joint is a lot stronger than the shoulder joint, because the head of the femur fully fits into the acetabulum. Now, when you look at the pelvis from the bottom image and the image above the bottom image, you can see that there are two openings, one going in, one coming out. So this is going to going in to the pelvic cavity, and this is going out of the pelvic cavity. So the pelvic inlet is an opening into the pelvic cavity, and the pelvic outlet is the opening out of the pelvic cavity.